Do what you want because a pirate is free. You are a pirate.
Hello, I hope you guys are ready for Freddy, because today we are going to be doing our first episode of the Pirates Cove podcast. Now, this is something we've been planning for a while, and as you can see by our whole little get-up, we are in character and ready to do this. So with this podcast, we are going to be talking about anything indie horror, but mostly stuff revolving around Five Nights at Freddy's. So I figured a good episode 1 would be us talking about where it all began, the original Five Nights at Freddy's. So for me, my introduction to Five Nights at Freddy's was through MatPat. I had no idea what a Freddy Fazbear was before that. All I know is that it was around Halloween time, and Matthew Patthew decided to talk about Pizza Bear. And when I watched his video of him showing off the gameplay and talking about the game lore, I was interested in it. But when he compared it to a Chuck E. Cheese murder incident, it kind of got me out of it. But it did make me investigate the actual game, and when I found out that it was about animatronics trying to kill you, I thought that was 100 times more interesting. So I followed the game's lore, and with the first game there isn't a lot of lore, but I really like the open-endedness of there's explanations in lore of the animatronics killing you because they think that you're an endoskeleton, or doing weird things because of logical reasons. It left an ambiguity of maybe they're haunted, maybe they're not, but it was up to you. That is until Scott ruined it by just telling you they're haunted. But how do you feel about Five Nights at Freddy's? How did you find out about the original game?
For me, I honestly don't remember who I watched first, because I was watching people. I loved Let's Plays, and I liked people who played horror games and stuff. It was either Markiplier who was the first one I saw play it, or there was someone else beforehand that I had seen play a couple rounds and he didn't really like it and didn't continue playing it. I think I saw someone else play it before Mark, but I loved it. I loved the atmosphere, and I loved the open-ended tellings of the story, like you said, how it was ambiguous. Like, it was clearly heavily implied that the kids were killed and put into the suits, and the suits were now haunted. But they were trying to brush it off as like, they're just malfunctioning. They're allowed to free roam, so they come over to see you. It's just their free roam. If they catch you, they're gonna stuff you in suits, because, well, endoskeletons aren't allowed to be out of suits, and you just so happen to look like one, funnily enough.
You know what's funny, though?
Why we haven't fixed this, I don't know.
There's something to indicate that that's BS from the beginning, because in the
absolutely.
parts and service room, there is a bear endoskeleton.
Exactly.
But when you get put in the costume, there isn't one. So I'm assuming they put you in there with the endoskeleton, so you'd get squished. That's my own thought about that.
More than likely that, or they tossed it out while they were struggling to put you into a suit. But either way, like, to me it was always heavily implied that they were supposed to be haunted. And with the posters of missing kids, the thing that they detained someone, and the "It's me" signs, it all, especially with the Golden Freddy flashing on screen, it all just seemed like, yeah, they're definitely haunted. So I'm not really shocked that Scott did eventually come out and say, yeah, they're haunted. But the first game, I honestly think, is my favorite of all of them. I think it's the most solid, and it's the simplest of all of them as well.
For me, I like the original game and Fnaf 2, because they actually look like they take place at a real pizzeria. Fnaf 2 was already stretching at how advanced a pizzeria could be, but I like the aesthetic of an old rundown pizzeria. A lot of the Chuck E. Cheeses in the 2000s were starting to actually look like that. So it was cool to see something that actually resembled real life, and it puts you in the shoes of the guy you're playing as, and it makes it 100 times more relatable. But another thing that I really like is the aesthetic of, like, the ambient music. It's really cool. You don't get like a soundtrack to this game. You just get like hums and whistles and burrs. You hear a fan. Like,
I think the first game genuinely has the best ambient noises. I think it's honestly the creepiest. Sets the mood really well.
another thing I really like about Five Nights at Freddy's 1 is that up until the later nights, the animatronics really aren't that hard to deal with. Like later on, they would introduce things like a music box you gotta wind, a mask you gotta put on, vents you have to clear, like a bunch of insane stuff. But for the original game, it was just, if it gets near your door, lock the door. Don't lock the door too long or else the power will go out. Avoid Foxy, check on him in the camera. It made a really solid gameplay loop, and I still go back and play iterations of the first Five Nights at Freddy's game because of that. It is as challenging as you want it to be, and as long as they balance out the animatronics, it is perfectly fun, and it is still a game that holds up to me, unlike other Five Nights at Freddy's games. And as we keep talking about these, I will have a lot less nice stuff to say. But I feel like that the gameplay loop is solid, and all the animatronics are extremely well designed. Like, Bonnie is a laid-back guy who has a bass guitar. Freddy is a cool dude with a top hat and a microphone. Chica has her cupcake. Everyone has something that's identifiable. And with Foxy, he's just a pirate. And him being a pirate, that's everything you need to know about him. He is now a fully fleshed out character. That's why this is the Pirates Code podcast, because everything you need to know about him is established with him being a pirate. And he is definitely the standout character, and he is the reason why I have Foxy stuff, because he is the one that is more fleshed out than all of them. Later on, we would get Freddy being terrifying with the Darth Vader voice, Chica being goofy with her obsessive eating, Bonnie being even more laid back. But for the first game, all we had was Foxy for personality. He would sing, he would charge your door and bang on it. He was the star of the show. Like, he was the showstopper. He was the one stealing the spotlight.
He's the most popular animatronic in the game as well, like in-game universe. Like, the kids loved him. I'm really upset though, because everyone else in later games got more fleshed out personalities, but my favorite, Bonnie, gets thrown to the wayside. We don't really know much about him personality-wise, and any of the games.
Yeah, it's kind of sad. I feel like the Fnaf 1 characters are really, like, neglected on, and I feel like that Bonnie and Chica especially, because they still don't have voice lines, and they still don't have fleshed out personalities, which they should by now.
It's just so lame, because the first game is the one that hooked me in the most and wanted me to see more of this universe that was created. I wanted to know more of the story, more of the lore. I wanted to know who these characters were and what happened and everything. And it's just really sad and disappointing to me that a lot of these characters just get pushed aside and forgotten about, especially characters like Foxy, because he was set up for being like the guy who did the bite of 87 and stuff, and that was just completely scrapped.
So when it comes to theories for the first game, you get some really lame ones. You get you play as the killer, which, yeah, I can kind of see where you're coming from with that, and that would be later revisited. The Foxy's a good guy, where he doesn't actually want to kill you because he doesn't have a jump scare animation. You just die of fright, which, of course, that's not true, but Foxy does seem like that good of a guy. You get some very loose theories, but mostly hoaxes. You get things like, oh, this lost animatronic, I have a blurry screenshot of it, but trust me, it exists. My uncle's dad knows Scott Coffin. It's totally legit, I swear. It's definitely not made in Photoshop. You don't get too many genuine theories for this, and I think it's mostly because there wasn't a lot to work with for the first game, but that's also a blessing too, because this game isn't weighed down by its lore. The only things it introduces are like missing children's, a possible murderer, the bite of 87, like stuff like that. Very simple stuff. Nothing really contradicts itself yet. And that's why I like FNAF 1, because of its simplicity. And at least for FNAF 1, I like the fan theories. I like the hoaxes. I think that they're very quaint, and I think that it's nostalgic to look back on them. especially the Chica being a duck or a chicken debate.
The Chica being a duck or a chicken debate is so silly, and I basically just blame Markiplier for that, because I thought she was a chicken. It's so weird that he would think that she was a duck.
Now let's talk about the Let's Players. The Let's Players are definitely the biggest reason why FNAF blew up. A lot of people would assume MatPat, but you gotta remember, for the original Five Nights at Freddy's, MatPat did one theory, and his one theory wasn't even close to being right. So MatPat definitely played a part in it, because like I said before, he's what made me realize what Five Nights at Freddy's was. But it was definitely people like Markiplier and Jacksepticeye that really got a ton of people into Five Nights at Freddy's. And I remember watching Markiplier's full playthrough, but it would be a while till I got into Jacksepticeye. And I will say, I got into Mark through Five Nights at Freddy's. So I wouldn't even known who Markiplier was if it wasn't for Five Nights at Freddy's. I knew who Jack was because of Happy Wheels well before this, but this franchise introduced me to Markiplier, and I have to thank it for that. And other than those two, I don't know anyone else who covered FNAF 1. A lot of the other FNAF tubers wouldn't come till later, so those are the only two I can remember covering this franchise at that point.
You see, I was watching Markiplier a year or two before FNAF even came out, so I was already like on board with his kind of content, but his playthrough was definitely what got me more into FNAF than anything. I know Jack was also big, but I didn't really like his playthrough. You can't really talk about Mark, though, without also bringing up a little bit of Yummy Mash, because he's the one who introduced him to FNAF. I know he doesn't really, get brought up much now, but he did it before Mark, and because of just how big FNAF was, I can't really remember anyone else's names. But I was watching quite a few people doing Let's Plays and stuff of the FNAF games. And that also is stuff like animations, which I think we'll talk about next.
Well, before we switch to animations, we have to talk about that. The Chica being a duck or a chicken was started because of Markiplier. And Markiplier coined the name Golden Freddy. Markiplier started the Bite 87 meme. Markiplier is definitely where a lot of FNAF 1 got its identity. And spinning off into that, Markiplier was one of the first FNAF 1 animations. One of the very first FNAF 1 animations was Markiplier's playthrough of FNAF. And FNAF 1's animations are iconic and forever etched into my head. They are the most simplistic of the animations, and a lot of them are taking the whole thing as a joke and trying to play it up to its logical extreme. And for those, I like those. They're funny and all. But I really like the ones that just take a Let's Player and animate their playthrough. I know there are some that try to show the kids going missing or the killer going around and stuff. I wasn't really into fanfiction stuff. I wasn't really into the AU stuff. So for me, it began and ended with the Let's Player animations. But I know there was already a ton of FNAF animations with FNAF 1.
Oh, absolutely. My favorites were also the people going through doing the animating Let's Players do stuff. But then we also had sillier stuff that, I don't think they are skits, but some of the ones that, I don't think they are animations, but some of the ones that come to my mind during this are like the FNAF is not scary and other just sillier, goofier animations for FNAF.
The guy who did Brain Dump's animation for FNAF, like that will always be etched into my head. And I think that's the first time I saw someone sexualize Chica, which would become a big trend later on.
Yeah, unfortunately. Really wish that didn't happen, because a lot of the creeps came out when that happened.
The Chica in FNAF 2 seems more like it's modeled after his depiction of Chica than FNAF 1 Chica, to be honest. I think that the fans have a big impact on FNAF in general, and I think that goes for both positives and negatives. Positive, we get Golden Freddy. negative we get sexualized Chica, which is never a fun thing.
No, never.
But talking about animation, we should talk about something that the animation got mashed up to a lot. That being the Fnaf music. The Living Tombstone is the only one I could think off the top of my head, but the Fnaf music was iconic. And if you've seen any video of a cringy kid going up to his school making a fool of himself involving Fnaf, chances are it was the Living Tombstone's Fnaf song. It is beyond iconic, and I think they did music for like mostly every Fnaf game just because of how big that one blew up. Like, there are so many people that made careers off of doing indie horror game music that started with Fnaf. And for me, the only one that really stands the test of time is the Living Tombstone's first Fnaf song. I really love that one. Like, all the other Fnaf 1 songs just kind of blend in as like white noise to me, but that one is genuinely good.
Oh, I listened to so many Fnaf songs when I was younger. Like, I think the Living Tombstone's Fnaf 1 song is probably the best out of all of them. But then you had people like, I'm pretty sure JT Machinima, Try Hard Ninja, unfortunately Milo Pony, like a lot of people, like there was the Run Run song, Follow Me. There was a bunch of songs, and a lot of them I really still like, because a lot of them were just so good and forever like etched themselves into my memory.
Now we have to talk about the bad stuff, that being fan-made content. We got a lot of fan fictions from this, most involving being written from either the animatronics perspective or the killer's perspective. We got a ton of fan games, which is usually just Five Nights at X, like Five Nights at Sonic's, Five Nights at Chuck E. Cheese's, which that one's actually befitting.
Five Nights at Wario's.
Five Nights at Wario's. Five Nights at Treasure Island, which, by the way, that one never was accurate to the creepypasta. Mickey Mouse is supposed to be in a suit, not the literal Mickey Mouse. I understand one model is easy to find and the other one isn't, but even in the remakes, they still haven't fixed that problem. It is crazy. But we got a ton of Five Nights at Blank games, and I think that trend still carries to today, and it's because the gameplay loop is so easy to understand and so easy to replicate, but it's also so good. But unfortunately, we hardly ever get a Five Nights at Candy's, and mostly we get things like Five Nights at Thomas.
Five Nights at Thomas the Tank Engines. I think other than the fan games, some of the stuff that stands out the most to me is some of the content from like the killer animatronics point of view, and the one that I will always remember is someone animated the killer, who I'm pretty sure was supposed to be a Vincent Purple Guy at that time, mashed up to the I Can't Decide song.
Purple Guy wouldn't exist
so
at that
cringe.
point, babe. Purple Guy wouldn't exist yet. He wasn't introduced till the second game.
Oh, you're right.
That'll be for a FNAF 2 video. There's no Purple Guy yet. No Vincent, no Toast. None of that. Just mysterious killer.
I forget, because a lot of that stuff that was happening was like mixed up at the same time just because of how soon the second game came out. But you're right, that was second game, not first game.
Yeah, for the first game, it really was just them leaning in on the Chuck E. Cheese aspects. It was really just them working with the bare minimum of what they had. It was really just people liking this idea. Because like for most horror games, it was you're a guy with a gun going around shooting monsters. There's no real dread. Or you being a guy who has to solve puzzles in order to get through something or collect something and spooky monster chasing you. There really wasn't a game like FNAF where you can't run, you can barely hide, and the monsters are always there, near you. There's no sense of safety. The only safety you get are with the doors. And if you abuse the doors, you'll lose that safety too, and you'll instantly lose the game. FNAF 1 is simple and punishing, and it's also iconic, and I think that it forever changed indie horror.
Well, you also have to remember, FNAF 1 was coming right after the hype of Slender Man was dying down. So we went from that game where you're constantly being stalked in a forest, but you still, like, you've got the ability to move around and run away from him, to now being locked behind a desk, unable to
There was
explore.
also the SCP game, and
Was that at that time?
what?
I thought that was later.
No, that was around the same time.
Was it? Okay.
There was the SCP game, and then there was another one, but I can't remember what it was called, but PewDiePie played it a ton.
Not shocked.
But there was a few indie horror games at that point, but FNAF definitely invented its own genre. And if it wasn't for FNAF crawling, there wouldn't be room for Poppy or Bindi or Tattletale or all these other franchises to walk and run. FNAF literally invented the entire indie horror mascot thing on its own. And later on, as we continue covering FNAF and going through the history of FNAF on this podcast, we'll talk about just how many other horror genres it innovated in and basically molded. FNAF's stay in horror is forever remembered with just how much it has changed. It brought a lot of positives, it brought a lot of negatives, but I feel like that FNAF's legacy will never go away. I feel like even 10 years from now, we'll still be talking about FNAF, we'll still be doing retrospectives, we'll still have adaptations. But speaking of adaptations, we have gotten so many remakes of FNAF 1, and some are good, where you play as the animatronics trying to kill the people. Some of the ones are where you get to free roam around the whole pizzeria. Pretty cool. And the newest one, Five Nights at Freddy's Plus, is going to be reimagining the whole game, changing up some of the gameplay, changing up the story. I'm really hyped for this game. I just don't know when it's going to come out. I wish it was out already so we could talk about it here in this episode. But I'm assuming that later on we'll just have to dedicate an episode to it. But I feel like the reason why FNAF 1 and 2 get more remakes than any other game is because those games are the best games because of its atmosphere, its music, its choice of sounds, its characters, and its simple gameplay loop. I feel like that's why people want to reimagine these, people want to redo these, because they want to show you what this game could be using modern gaming techniques, like having the room actually be fully 3D, having extra little mini games, having actual storytelling. Like, it's always interesting to see an adaptation and a remake. And with Help Wanted, we actually got to see a lot of what FNAF 1 could have been in full 3D. The way you work on the cameras, the way the animatronics pop out and scare you, and the parts and service sections are really cool, where you have to take the animatronics apart and rip stuff off of them and put stuff in them. It is so cool to actually see how these guys function and how this world actually works. Like that Chica actually does eat pizza, or that Freddy has a little clock inside of him, like a little music box thing, and Bonnie has to have his face winded and tuned to his guitar. It's just so weird, but because of how detailed it is, it seems so real. And I guess that's just what hooks me in for FNAF 1 other than the other games, is like FNAF 1 feels so grounded. It feels like something that could actually exist. There's no technology that's too insane in FNAF 1. It's a bit far-fetched for the 1980s, but the technology could and kinda did exist. And that's what always roped me into FNAF 1, is like the realism of it. This could have been a thing. And with the hoaxes that existed at the time of people trying to find the real Freddy Fazbear's Pizza or prove that it existed because it's 2014 and this is the thing to do, I think I wasn't the only one that felt how realistic this game setting was.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of why the first game is my favorite, just because of how real it felt. Like, the most it had that could be like sci-fi was that the animatronics were haunted by ghosts. And even then, it was supposed to be more ambiguous. If you wanted to believe that it was the ghosts, you could believe it. If you didn't, you could brush it off and go with what the phone guy was telling you. And that's what I loved, is it felt so real and so grounded. And you were trapped in this small little space with just the doors to keep them out. That was the only thing protecting you. What I think is kind of interesting, though, is like the doors was such an iconic thing to FNAF, but they went away and didn't really actually come back until Security Breach. I know they kind of came back at the 4th game, but it didn't have the power meter, and it's not the same.
So for me, I feel like a lot of other FNAF games slowly lose what made the first game special. But to end this on a more positive note rather than the bleak outlook of what Freddy's would become, let's talk about the best thing involving Freddy's, that being the phone guy. The phone guy is the perfect exposition tool. He tells you what might be happening, he tells you how things work, he gives you lore about the universe and about the characters, he jokes, he isn't too well voice acted, but he's quirky and relatable enough to really sell you on that this is a real place and that this is something that's really happening. And when he gets killed, it reminds you that that could be you. That even someone like the phone guy is susceptible to being killed by these animatronics. And it's honestly traumatic to hear it happen. And that's definitely the biggest thing that people take away from that game, is that the phone guy, the guy who was your tutorial, the guy who was your guide, he died, and you heard it, and you couldn't stop it. And then the next night, you get a horrific call of just static and garble, because you don't have the safety of phone guy anymore. You have to deal with the fact that you're alone with these guys on their hardest setting. And that type of world building, that type of slow integration of creepy facts and knowledge, and then slowly getting you used to just how messed up this place is, it was a nice way to ease you into the difficulties of each night. And the fact that the phone guy even explains to you some of the hardships that you're going to be facing, like Foxy, or talking to you about Freddy coming out, or about how they're slowly becoming more aggressive. Like, these are things that help you throughout the game if you choose to listen to him. And it's just so brilliant that they put the phone guy in this game. And I think phone guy will always be the most memorable part of Five Nights at Freddy's 1.
Yes, a phone guy was honestly one of my favorite parts of it, because it just made it feel all that more real. Because you hear him die and there's nothing you could do. You come back for your next shift and he's just gone. And he felt really real. Like, he felt like just a guy trying to do his job that unfortunately fell to the hands of Freddy because he didn't manage his power correctly. So it just really shows, as the night goes on, it's gonna get harder, and you have to be careful because that could just be you.
So I guess to end this is that everything from the ambience to the weird music you'd hear playing to Freddy's music box to Foxy's hums, everything from the sound design, the hum of the fan, everything involving the jump scares, the way the animatronics move, this was built to be a horror classic. And I honestly feel like that when it comes to the other games, they can't live up to the legacy that Five Nights at Freddy's 1 left. So many modern things use the iconography set in Freddy's 1. So many other games use the renders of the characters from Freddy's 1. Even though these characters haven't appeared that much, this is still how people imagine Freddy's. Five Nights at Freddy's 1 will always have a looming presence over every other Freddy's game, and they have a hard time living up to its standards and its presence on the internet.
I think it's also just a good success story, because Scott went from struggling to get any of his games green-lighted on Steam or any attention to his games to getting criticism that his characters looked like animatronics, and he took that and he ran. And he became so successful because of that. Because he was willing to listen to criticism. He's like, okay, my characters look like scary animatronics. Let's make a game about scary animatronics and see where that goes. and it took him so far.
I think the thing that makes Five Nights at Freddy's so successful is just the charm of it.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I think that everything that comes after it will never have the charm and appeal that the original game had. This looked like a game that wasn't set to succeed, and even from its fundraisers and its initial reaction before it became like an actual game, it really seemed like it wouldn't succeed. But the fact that it did, and the way that it did, I think that it's impossible to replicate, even though everyone always chases after the shadow that this game left. And I think that's just something really special, and I think I'll always hold the first Five Nights at Freddy's game above the other ones, and when I want merch, it is still of these guys. These guys are Freddy and the gang. I don't hate the other games, but this first game is just drenched in personality, and it's no wonder why it both built and continues to hold up this whole franchise. But yeah, this has been the Pirates Cove Podcast Episode 1, reminiscing on Five Nights at Freddy's 1. I hope that you guys liked our journey through this franchise, through this tale of Five Nights at Freddy's 1. If you guys liked this podcast, hit the like button. If you know people who would be interested in stuff like this, share it around. We're trying to grow this channel. There is so much more to do, and we are halfway to 1,000 subscribers. So if you want to help out with that and you're not subscribed already, considering subscribing and hitting the bell. Till next time.
Do what you want, cause a pirate is free. You are a pirate.